Hey there, survivors. If you can hear me, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and where you're listening from, I'm glad you made it. Now, get comfortable. This is your next story.
Rain was coming down through the spruce when I knelt beside the old service road and started digging mud away from the capstone over one of my cache pipes. I only had 2 fingers under the edge when I saw him. Grey jacket, wet hood, one arm hanging low. He stood under the brush about 30 feet away and did not move at all. I stayed in the same crouch and looked past him. There was another one uphill near a cedar stump, half hidden by fern and blown branches. I had walked right through that stretch 10 minutes earlier and never saw either of them. Wind touched the back of my neck and crossed left to right. I lowered the stone, pressed it back into place, smeared mud over the seam, and backed away without stepping onto the gravel. I cut west through wet timber and kept the biggest trunks between me and the road. Out here, the infected did not always come at you fast. Cold rain changed them. They would stand in brush for hours, quiet, head tilted, waiting for scent or noise to give them a line. A lot of people died from that. They watched the open ground and forgot to check the brush at knee height. One hand stayed free. The other kept brushing fern and branches out of my face. My hatchet rode loose at my side, not for fighting, for roots, bark, and anything I had to cut fast without digging through my pack. The woods were dark even in daylight. Every wet branch looked solid until it shifted under weight. My shelter sat above a shallow draw under a tangle of old windfall, where the ground buckled, and the tree trunks lay piled over each other. The tree that hid me had gone down long before the outbreak. Sitka spruce, huge. The root ball stood up taller than a truck and held a wall of dirt, stone, and twisted roots. The main cavity opened on the uphill side, where rot had hollowed part of the trunk. From a few feet away it looked like broken bark and shadow. I crawled in feet first, dragged my pack after me, and pulled the bark panel shut. Then I stayed still and listened. Water tapped through the outer bark. A limb rubbed high above me. Nothing else. Inside, the space felt damp and cold, the way it always did after a full night of rain. I had lined parts of it with cut insulation board, greenhouse plastic, and thin slats from a shed I tore apart almost 2 winters ago. It kept wind off me. It did not make the place dry. The foot end of the bed had started dripping again. I slid my hand under the leak and felt the water running down the inner bark seam. I shoved a rag into the crack, moved my cup under the worst of it, and looked over what I had left on the shelf. Flour down to 1 small tin, dried mussels in a paper bundle, a little nettle. Not enough for comfort, enough to get through the day without going back out into the open. My name is Erin Caldwell. Before all this, I worked forestry jobs on the Olympic Peninsula, trail surveys, burn assessments, damage reports after storms. I knew how to move through wet country without getting turned around, and how to carry what I needed without loading myself down with junk. That helped early on. It did not make me ready for 3 years of living alone in a rotten tree. I was not a medic. I was not a carpenter. I was not one of those people who can pull food out of the ground every day and smile about it. I learned by wasting gear and paying for mistakes. I ruined stored grain with 1 bad seal. I cracked a rib slipping on a log my first winter out here. I burned a plastic wall panel inside this shelter when a vent joint got too hot. Every fix took longer than I thought it would. I sat on the edge of the platform and thought about the cache I never opened. That pipe held 3 jars of rendered fat, 1 small coil of snare wire, 2 soft packs of pain pills that were getting old, and a wrapped bundle of hooks and line. I had been saving it for the next dry stretch when I could work the creek without turning the whole bank into a fresh mud trail. If those 2 infected had drifted near it on their own, the food was probably fine. If a person had crossed that spot first, the pipe might already be empty. I pulled my notebook out from under the bed slats and checked my marks from the last 3 weeks. 2 caches hit by animals. 1 washed out after heavy rain. 1 intact near the switchback bridge. 1 unchecked near the old road. My world kept getting smaller. Every trip took more out of me and brought back less. I lit the alcohol stove inside the vent box and watched the flame catch low and blue. The vent pipe ran through packed moss and out through a hollow branch I had wired under another fallen limb away from the shelter. It worked if I kept the flames small and the air cold. I set water over it, mixed in a little flour, some shredded mussel, and nettle, then ate the paste before it thickened too much. I did not cook much inside the tree. Heat built condensation, smell carried. One mistake with fire and the whole shelter would turn into a trap. When I finished, I waited for the metal to cool before I packed the stove away again. Then, I checked the wall near the pipe joint and the shelf above it. Dry enough, no curl in the plastic. Good. This tree was not my first place. I moved through a lot of bad ones before I found it. A maintenance shed with a door that would not latch. A culvert that flooded up to my knees. A hatchery outbuilding that smelled so bad I left after one night. Then a cabin near Lake Crescent with 5 other people who could not keep to one rule for even a day. One man kept lighting a lantern near the window after dark. One woman brought in strangers from the road and acted like refusing them was the cruel thing. A younger guy buried canned food in the woods and lied about it when shelves started coming up short. I stayed there too long. Then a smiling man came through, traded talk for supplies, left, and came back after dark with more people. I got out through the bathroom window and spent the night in wet brush with my pack under my chest and my boots full of mud. By morning the place was done. I never went back. By noon the rain eased enough for me to move again. I checked the near catchment first and filled the filter bucket from the tarp edge. Then I went to the second emergency cache above the drawer. The marker stone was turned. Not much. Most people would miss it. I did not. I knelt and brushed needles aside until I found the cut line in the dirt. Clean edge, pressed back flat. Somebody had opened it and covered the hole with care. I lifted the tin and knew from the weight that food was gone before I even opened it. Dried beans missing, salt missing, sewing needles left behind. Spare shirt untouched. Whoever did it took calories and one trade item, then closed it up and walked away. I covered the hole again and spent the next hour working uphill through brush until I had a view of my shelter zone from above. Nothing moved near the tree. That only told me nobody was standing there in daylight. I started stripping sign the minute I got back down. I cut the old snare line by the fern run and packed the wire. I took down the tarp funnel over the side seep and folded it into my pack. I brushed out the kneeling spots where I filled water. Then I climbed to a dead snag that leaned over a gap in the trees and used my binoculars to look toward the coast. Grey water, white chop. One steady column of smoke near the cove south of the ruined marina. I had seen smoke there more than once this month. Same place, same size. Not driftwood scavengers passing through. That meant a fixed camp. Maybe a fish smoke rack. Maybe a cook point with a windbreak built around it. Either way, it meant people who had lasted long enough to settle into routine. I checked my gear after that. Both boots were splitting across the forefoot. The right sole had started peeling near the toe. I had sealed it with pine pitch and wrapped it down with cord. That bought me time, not much more. Lamp oil sat low in the bottle. My filters were near done. I had 6 shotgun shells left and no shotgun worth trusting after the firing pin chip on the old pump I carried for one season. I kept the shells for trade. Rice for maybe 6 meals if I stretched it. Some hooks. Fish line. 1 good saw blade. 1 hatchet with a handle I had already re-wedged 3 times. I could stay hidden and eat through the last of it, then get slow and sloppy. Or I could try to make contact on terms I chose. Neither option looked clean. I packed a small trade bundle before dark, 2 boxes of roofing nails I had kept dry in wax paper, 3 jars of chanterelles from the second fall after the collapse, 4 batteries with mixed charge from an old weather station, 1 coil of stripped copper wire. I wrapped the lot in a towel, sealed it in a bait tin with the rust sanded off, and wrote a note in block letters on a sheet from my notebook. Trade, salt, lamp oil, flour, boot leather if any. Leave goods here at dawn 2 days from now if interested. 1 person. I read it twice, then packed it with the goods. No name, no questions, no hint where I slept. I sat in the dark with that tin in my lap and listened to rain hit the bark over my head. If I carried it to the cove and their lookout saw me, I might get enough supplies to hold through another stretch of bad weather. I might also tell the wrong man, There was someone inland with enough dry storage to keep mushrooms sealed and nails clean. I left before first light and cut south under the ridge where windfall made the walking slow, but kept me off the old road. By the time the sky started turning grey, I could hear surf. The cove lay below me where a concrete boat ramp dropped into black water between broken dock pilings. 7 buildings stood well enough to use. 2 looked occupied, blue tarp over one roof, nets hanging from one side wall. I watched from brush for a while. A woman in a yellow rain shell carried split wood to the smoke point. A heavy man dragged crab pots above the tide line. Another person stepped out of a fuel shed, swept the beach with binoculars, and went back inside. Nobody shouted. Nobody wondered. Good. That meant rules held. I worked down through a side gully with the trade tin under my jacket and kept my feet off the open mud where I could. The brush got thicker near the bottom. Salal and vine maple crowded the banks and left only a narrow strip of wet ground to step on. I stopped twice to listen. Surf. A gull, out over the water. A loose line tapping a dock post. No voices from above me. When I reached the overturned skiff at the edge of the cove, I slid the tin under the stern, turned it so the note side faced inland, and wedged it where a lookout would catch the shape on a careful sweep. Then I backed out of the gully the same way I came in and took the north wall instead of the center. I had no interest in walking where somebody down there might expect me to walk. I had gone maybe 40 yards when a branch snapped uphill behind me. It was not loud. It was the kind of sound a boot makes when weight comes down fast on soaked wood. I dropped behind a root flare and looked back through fern. 2 men moved along my back trail where the gully narrowed. One wore a green poncho cut short at the knees. The other had a stripped pack frame with a pry bar tied to it and a rope bundle hanging off one side. Neither one matched anybody I had watched in the cove. The man with the pry bar stopped at the mud edge where I had blurred a print, touched the mark with 2 fingers, then looked uphill toward the saddle I sometimes used on the way back inland. He was not wandering. He was reading. I eased backward until the root flare blocked me, slid into the runoff wash beside it, and let the cold water carry over my boots while I worked north through alder roots and stone. I stayed low and moved 1 step at a time so nothing snapped under me. The wash bent hard after 30 yards, then pinched into a chute full of gravel and driftwood. I followed that until the water split around a log jam and crawled under the biggest trunk I could fit under. I waited there with my cheek against wet bark and watched the wash mouth through a screen of roots. The 2 men came down to the bend a few minutes later. Poncho Man checked both sides. Prybar looked at the water, then at the alder tangle above me, and kept going uphill. He trusted the line more than the wash. Good. That meant he thought I was protecting dry ground, or a direct route. He had not figured out yet that I would throw away a clean trail before I walked him toward the tree. I stayed in the wash until my socks started bunching under my heels and the water stopped feeling cold. Then, I cut west across broken ground, climbed a spur ridge I only used in bad weather, and aimed for one of my fallback spots instead of home. It sat under a slab of rock where an old cedar stump had rotted out into a dry pocket big enough for a pack, a bedroll, and 1 person willing to sleep curled on one side. I had not used it in over 4 months. The opening was half blocked by fern, and 1 sagged branch I had tied in place with root fiber. Everything inside smelled stale and mousy. The tarp square I kept folded there was dry. The candle stub had gone soft in its tin. 1 jar of hazelnuts was intact. 2 had cracked in the freeze and spoiled. I ate a small handful, changed socks, wrung out the wet pair, and sat with the hatchet across my knees until the light went flat and grey through the branches. I did not go near the tree that afternoon. That choice scraped at me the whole time. My sleeping bag was there. My better knife was there. The rice, lamp oil, and half my line were there. So were the root notes I had stopped keeping in my pocket after a bad fall last winter. If I walked back right away, I might save a quiet night. If those 2 men had stayed on me longer than I thought, I would hand them the best thing I had left. I kept seeing the way the one with the pry bar touched the ground and lifted his head. He looked patient. Men like that did not need to rush. They only needed you to make 1 soft move toward what you cared about. Rain thickened again by late afternoon and drove sideways into the rock pocket. I shifted deeper, put the tarp across my knees, and went over the situation 1 piece at a time. A fixed camp sat in the cove, at least 3 people, maybe more inside the sheds. 2 strangers were working the inland edge above it and reading sign. One of my caches had already been opened by somebody who knew what to take. Those things fit together too clean to ignore. Either the cove had men working farther inland than I thought, or another crew had learned that lone traders and hidden stores were feeding the people on the coast. I had seen both types before. The first group smiled more. The second wasted less breath. Both could strip a person down to scraps if they got close enough. I waited until full dark, then left the rock pocket and moved back toward my shelter zone by a route that crossed 2 draws and came in from the north above the root ball. The rain helped. It flattened small noise and softened scent. It also turned every slope into a slide. I crawled the last 50 feet on hands and knees and stopped under a wind-thrown hemlock where I could see the upper side of the tree through 3 layers of brush. Nothing moved near the trunk. No lamp, no whisper, no fresh cut in the fern. I stayed there until my knees went numb in wet moss. Then I heard something downhill. One stone clicked against another. Then a low scrape, careful and brief. A person feeling his way up through roots in the dark. I backed out 1 foot at a time and circled east until I reached the old elk run that crossed the draw below the tree. From there, I watched a shape move through the lower brush with no light at all. He was too far to make out a face. The shoulders looked wide under a slicker or poncho. He stopped twice near the seep where I usually filled water and crouched long enough to tell me he had found sign there. Then he moved on. He did not come straight to the trunk. That gave me one small piece of relief. He had not found the entrance. He was searching the edges, building a map. I slid backward through mud, put another 200 yards between me and the tree, and stayed out until first light with my back to a cedar stump and my pack under my boots to keep it off the soaked ground. Morning brought no break in the weather. The whole ridge dripped and hissed with water. I made myself wait until full grey before moving. If anybody had chosen to sit on the slope and watch for a hidden owner returning, dawn would be the time. I took a long loop west, crossed the old service road at a place where rock showed through, and came back to the tree from below. Halfway up the draw, I found a fern stem broken clean and bent under a boot print that had already softened at the edge. Size maybe 10 or 11, deep heel, same man as the mud print near the gully, or close enough. He had not bothered to hide that step. He had probably made it in poor light and missed the stem. That was the only comfort in it. He was careful, not perfect. I did not enter the shelter that morning either. I moved past the trunk, checked the vent branch from a distance, then slipped uphill to the stash hollow where I kept 1 spare tarp, 2 tins of oats, and a wrapped bundle of dry socks. The hollow had not been touched. I took the oats and socks, left the tarp and brushed out my entry. That was the pattern for the rest of the day. No direct path, no full load. I picked off the outer stores one by one and shifted them into a new line north of the rock pocket. By late afternoon, I had 3 small caches rebuilt under slash piles and 1 food bag buried under a rotted stump I did not like much but could reach fast. It was not enough. It was better than doing nothing. The next dawn, I went back toward the cove to see whether anybody had answered the trade offer. I took the ridge above the gully and stayed far enough out that I could watch the skiff through the binoculars. The tin was gone. In its place, tucked between the skiff keel and a stone, sat a narrow fish crate wrapped in blue tarp cord. I watched the cove for nearly an hour before going down. Same woman in the yellow shell, same heavy man. The lookout stepped out twice and scanned the beach. No sign of the 2 trackers. When the cove settled back into work, I worked down the gully, grabbed the crate, and climbed out with it under my arm. I did not open the crate until I was 2 ridges inland under a deadfall tangle. Inside sat 1 cloth sack of flour, 1 jar with maybe a pint of lamp oil, a thick strip of leather cut from something heavy, and a packet of salt sealed in wax paper. There was also a folded note on old chart paper. Dawn tomorrow. Ramp. 1 person. No long gun. Keep hands visible. Bring the copper and 1 jar. Signed with 1 name only. June. I read it twice, then held the paper under my nose. Smoke, fish, and old canvas. No perfume, no soap, no trace of anything that would have told me more. The flour alone was worth the risk of the walk. The leather strip might save 1 boot if I cut it clean. The meeting could also pin me between the cove and those two men, if June was working with them or had already talked. I spent the rest of that day making the choice harder. I patched the right boot with the leather strip and my last thick needle. The leather was good hide, stiff and used before, cut from a bigger piece. That meant somebody down there was tearing apart old gear with care, not burning through it and hoping another batch would show up later. I cooked half a cup of flour into paste with nettle and ate slowly so I would not finish it too fast. Then I walked one more loop past my tree from high ground and found a fresh mark near the seep. A willow wand had been pressed into the mud at an angle that did not match the brush around it. Not natural, not a child's trick. A marker. Somebody had marked a point and planned to come back. I went to the ramp before dawn with one jar of chanterelles, the copper wire, and the hatchet on my belt. I left the shotgun shells and the better goods inland. Fog lay thick over the water and covered the cove to knee height. The concrete was slick with weed and salt. June stood near the top of the ramp in the same yellow shell I had seen from the ridge. Up close she looked mid-40s, hard-faced, not skinny, not soft either, with dark hair tied back and one gloved hand tucked in the shell pocket. A man stood 20 feet behind her with the binoculars hanging at his chest. He was taller than I expected, narrow through the shoulders, beard clipped short, watchful eyes that did not drift. I set the jar and wire on the ramp and stopped where the concrete changed color under the fog line. June looked at the goods, then at me. "You're the one leaving food in the woods. I'm the one who left the tin." "Same thing out here," I said. "I need flour, oil, salt, and boot leather. I can trade route info and dry goods when I have them." She nodded once. "You were followed yesterday." "I know." "So were we, earlier this week. 2 men, maybe 3. One big, one thin. They stay off the beach and work the tree line. We call the quiet infected sleepers when they get like this in rain. Those men do the same thing." The tall man behind her came forward enough to see me better but kept his hands off the binoculars. June glanced back at him and said, "This is Colin. He watches the north side and keeps count of what goes in and out." Colin gave one short nod. "You crossed the ridge clean. The pair behind you did not. We saw one of them on the old road yesterday afternoon." I kept my face still. "How long have they been near your cove?" "On and off for maybe 3 weeks," June said. "Long enough to notice. Long enough to strip one cabin north of here after the owner stopped making smoke. We found the place 2 days later. Food gone, blankets gone, nails and tools gone. The body outside had been turned over for pockets." She let that sit a second. "They don't rush. They wait for thin people to make a trade." I did not answer right away. June watched my hands, not my face. Colin watched the tree line over my shoulder. They had done this before. Meeting strangers on open ground, checking tone, checking weight shifts, reading how fast a person answered when risk walked into the conversation. I said, "I have one shelter inland. No cabin, no smoke, no reason for anybody to know where it is." "Then don't tell me," June said. "I'm not asking that." She bent, picked up the copper wire, felt the weight, then looked at the mushroom jar against the grey concrete. "I am asking whether those men found any part of your roots." "One cache, maybe 2. One marker left near my water." "That's enough for trouble. I know." She called back over her shoulder. The heavy man I had seen with the crab pots came out of the fog carrying a canvas sack and a small wooden box. He set both down, looked me over once, then looked away. Broad face, thick neck, red cap pulled low. June said, "Russ handles gear and crab lines. He doesn't enjoy meetings." Russ grunted. "She brought clean copper. That's enough." June ignored the tone. "There's more flour in the sack. Some dried fish, lamp oil, 1 spool of waxed cord, and a half bottle of iodine cut with boiled water. We use it for cuts, not for washing floors." She said that last part flat, maybe to test whether I was one of the people who heard one old trick and tried to pour it over every problem. "In return, I want one thing now, and one thing later. Now, I want the ridge route you used to get here. Later, I may want a guide inland for one salvage run if the weather opens." I thought it over with my eyes on the box, not on the people. The iodine mattered more than the fish. My left hand had a split in the thumb web from hauling wet line and brush, and it had started to look pale around the edge. The waxed cord would help with tarp seams and boot work. More flour meant another week if I stretched it. A guide run inland could cost more than all of that if it led people too close to my shelter. "I'll give you the ridge line that keeps off the open road," I said. "Not the last turn into my ground, not anything near where I sleep." June said, "That works. Why not trade with the men following you?" Russ gave a hard little laugh. "Men who read pockets before faces don't trade long." June lifted the sack and set it closer to me with her boot. "Take it and go. Use a different route out." I gave Colin the first 2 turns of the ridge route, plus the wash crossing where rock showed through and prints did not hold. He listened without interrupting, then repeated it back clean. That told me he had a better map in his head than most people I had met since the outbreak. June took the mushroom jar and said if the salvage run came together, she would leave another note under the skiff with a date. I picked up the sack and box, backed off the ramp, and climbed north through the brush until fog and timber swallowed the cove. I did not feel safer. I felt heavier. Trade helped in the moment. It also tied one more line between me and people who now knew I had enough dry storage to protect food from the weather, and enough nerve to come down to open ground alone. I spent the next 2 days moving the edges of my life. I cleaned the cut on my hand with the iodine until the skin looked raw, then wrapped it in cloth I boiled and dried over low heat. I moved 2 food caches farther north and left 1 empty tin buried shallow as a decoy. I shifted my water-fill point up the seep line and lined the kneeling spot with bark slabs so fresh mud would not hold the shape of my boot. I also put out 3 alarms around the tree zone, none of them fancy, none of them fast to build. One was a pebble tin hung inside a rotten snag with a cord across a narrow gap between ferns. One was a bark flap propped loose on the uphill side of the root ball. One was a thin, dry branch balanced behind a mossed log so it would roll if a boot pushed through the gap under it. None would stop a man. They would only tell me he was there. Late on the second afternoon, I tested the boot patch on wet ground and found the leather holding better than the old sole. That was the first small success I had felt in a while. Then I pushed too hard on a slick root above the draw. My right foot slid, and I came down on my left knee against a buried stone. No clean break, no sharp sound. Just one blunt hit that folded the leg under me and left me on both hands in mud. I stayed down until the sting changed and made myself move the joint through a careful bend. It worked. That did not mean much out here. A knee could work and still turn a day's distance into a crawl. I got back to the tree by shortening each step and using the hatchet handle as a brace. By dark, the front of the joint had puffed up enough to pull tight under my pants. The tree felt smaller that night. Rain drummed on the bark. The knee ached whenever I shifted, and the bark seam over the foot end started leaking again. I had enough flour for 3 light meals, 1 full jar of fish from June, and the dried fish strip if I wanted to use it fast before damp got into the wrap. I lay there with the lamp turned low and stared at the plastic wall where condensation beaded and ran behind the slats. 3 years in this shelter had trained me to hear every creak in the wood and tell which ones came from weather and which from weight outside. Near midnight, I heard the bark flap alarm give 1 short scrape, then stop. I put the lamp out with 2 fingers, waited in the dark, and counted slowly to 100. Nothing followed. Maybe a branch, maybe a raccoon. I did not sleep after that. I sat with the hatchet under one hand until the grey of dawn showed through the bark seams. June's next note came 4 mornings later. Salvage run tomorrow if weather clears by dawn. Need 1 person who knows culverts and locked state sheds. Trade, flour, cord, lantern wick, 2 trap springs. 1 pair of men's boots with bad upper leather but sound soles. I read the list 3 times. The boots alone could change my month. I could cut them down for parts or wear them with extra cloth if the fit was close enough. Trap springs meant I could repair the 1 snap trap I used for squirrels and rats when they showed at the right time of year. I had no interest in leading anybody near my tree, but a state shed east of the old burn line sat far enough away that I could guide from memory and still keep my home blind. I packed light, wrapped the note in oilcloth, and burned the scrap edge in the stove so no one would find the handwriting on my side of the exchange. The weather did clear by dawn, though not the way I wanted. The rain quit. The cold stayed. Every branch held beads of water ready to dump down a collar the minute you brushed past. June waited at the top of the ramp with Colin and one other woman I had not seen close before. She was short, solid through the arms, hair cut rough at the jaw, and carried a coil of rope over one shoulder and a long pry bar on the other. June said, "Petra comes when we need doors open or engines moved." Petra looked at my knee, then at the stick I had cut for support and not wanted to bring. "You fit for this?" "Fit enough if nobody rushes." She nodded. "Good. I don't rush uphill for people who lie." We moved inland in a staggered line with Colin out front for the first mile, and me taking over once the ground turned familiar. The state shed sat near an old service spur that maintenance crews had used before the outbreak to store culvert bands, fencing, and trail repair tools. It also sat within scent range of a low draw where infected tended to settle when weather ran cold and wet. I told June that before we crossed the second creek. She listened and changed the order without debate, putting Petra at the rear and Russ, who had joined us halfway up from the beach with an empty pack frame, in the middle where noise from his boots would not lead. No one talked unless it helped. That made the walk easier. We hit the first sign of infected near a cluster of wind-thrown alder where the service spur narrowed. One stood on the downhill side of the trail under dripping brush, head low, jacket dark with water, both hands hidden in fern. Another sat or had fallen against a stump farther back and did not move until Petra's rope brushed a branch overhead. Then the head turned. No rush came with it. They only fixed on the sound and started forward in the same direct way I had seen 100 times since the first winter. June raised one hand, and everyone stopped. I picked up a stone, tossed it high and east into a pocket of salal, and waited. The first infected changed line and went toward the sound. The second followed after a short lag. We stepped off the trail to the uphill side and moved through huckleberry and slick roots until the spur opened again. The shed sat exactly where I remembered it, tucked against a cut bank with one side half screened by young firs. The door was closed. The lock chain hung. No fresh sign showed in the mud except deer and the washed remains of old boot tracks from months or years back. Russ took the chain in both hands and tested it. Petra set down the pry bar and worked the hasp with slow pressure, not trying to pop it fast. The screws gave before the chain did. Inside, we found 3 metal shelves, 2 stacks of culvert bolts, a bin of fencing staples gone orange with rust, 1 half box of lantern wicks sealed in plastic, 5 rolls of repair tape, and a row of rubber boots too cracked to matter. The real find sat under the back shelf, 2 sealed buckets of roofing sealant, a box of new leather gloves in mixed sizes, and 1 pair of work boots with oil-stiff soles and split uppers that could still be cut apart for parts. June let me pick through the boots before Russ packed anything. That bought more trust than any speech could have. The pair was 2 sizes too big for me, but the soles were clean and thick. I could salvage enough from them to patch both of my own. I took 1 lantern wick pack and 1 pair of gloves sized close to mine. June took the tape, sealant, and the rest of the gloves. Russ packed the culvert bolts for some reason I did not ask about until Colin said they had a line trap on the beach gate that needed heavier anchors. That answer fit. The cove ran on gear and habits, not on stories. I liked that more than I expected. The trouble came on the way back. We had crossed the second creek and climbed into thicker timber when Colin froze and lifted 2 fingers. I saw nothing at first. Then a shape moved through vine maple on the opposite slope, too upright for an elk, too slow for a man who did not care if he was heard. Russ crouched behind a stump. Petra lowered her pack frame without a sound. June leaned toward me and said, "One of yours?" "Mine?" I whispered. "One of the men on your route." I looked again and caught a flash of green through the wet leaves. Poncho, same cut at the knees. He was not close enough to challenge. He was shadowing the line and checking who moved with me. That changed things fast. It meant somebody had watched the Cove Note exchange, or followed me after the first meeting, or had already been sitting on the inland routes and picked up 4 new sets of tracks. None of those options helped. June tapped Colin's sleeve and sent him left. Petra went right. Russ stayed put with the heavy pack. I expected them to chase. They did not. They only widened the line and made it hard for the watcher to know which person might double back. I took 3 slow steps downhill, broke a dead branch on purpose, then cut behind a stump and circled to a fallen cedar that gave me a lane across the slope. Green Poncho showed again between the maples. He had moved higher and was looking toward Russ, not toward me. I picked up a fist-sized chunk of rotten wood and threw it well behind him. He turned too hard at the sound. That gave Colin time to shift up one gully and cut him off from the road line. Poncho Man saw it late, changed direction, and dropped out of sight downslope. No shot, no shout, only brush shaking, then quiet. We did not follow. June made that call at once. Pack out, fast and clean. Nobody argued. We moved north instead of west, crossed a rock slide where prints would not hold, then cut back to the cove on a line I did not know. By the time we reached the beach, the sky had gone iron grey again, and wind was building off the water. Russ carried the heavy load straight into the fuel shed. Petra hauled the pry bar and rope to a side lean-to. Colin stayed outside and watched the tree line. June took me to the smoke point, poured half a cup of boiled water into a mug, and handed it over without comment. Only after I drank did she say, "That man was checking faces. He wanted to know who we trusted inland." "I didn't bring him to you." "I know. He was near us before you came down the ramp. You changed his route, not ours." I told her about the willow marker near my seep and the man searching the lower brush below my tree in the dark. I did not tell her exactly where the tree was. I gave landmarks in broad strokes. North Ridge, old stormfall zone. No live trail. June listened with her head tipped down over the mug in her hands. When I finished, she said, "There's a man named Vic Talbot. Used to strip marine yards with a crew before the roads locked up. We heard his name from a drifter last spring. Tall, patient, good with locks, fuel tanks, and other people's storage. One of the cabins hit north of us had hinges removed clean. No smashed wood, no rush. Fits him. Green Poncho could be his partner Boone. Medium build, quiet. We don't have a face on the third one." Russ came over with a roll of tape in one hand. "Third one limps on the left. Saw the print by the road 2 weeks back." June nodded once. "There you go." I left the cove with the boots, wick, gloves, and one extra packet of flour, but I did not go straight home. I spent that night in the rock pocket again and watched the tree zone from high ground the next morning. One of my alarms had tripped. The dry branch behind the mossed log was gone from where I balanced it. The bark flap on the root ball sat half open. No person in sight. No fresh voice in the woods. The place felt watched even when it looked empty. I crawled belly down to a point above the trunk and stayed there through most of the day. Near afternoon, a man came in from the lower draw and stopped beside the seep. Tall, dark jacket. No poncho. He crouched, touched the willow marker, then looked around as if testing whether the person who placed it had moved it since the last visit. Vic, if June had it right, or somebody trained the same way. He moved uphill and passed within 20 feet of my hidden exit without seeing it. I watched his boots step over the fern curtain that covered the opening. He checked the vent branch too. That part nearly broke the calm I had kept all day. He did not find the vent itself, but his gaze held on the line of deadfall above it longer than I liked. He knew to look for things that did not fit the lay of the ground. He only lacked the last piece. When he left, he took the lower route back out and paused at the empty decoy tin I had buried shallow 2 days before. He dug it up, opened it, looked at the clean empty inside, and smiled to himself in a way I did not like at all. Then he covered it again and walked off. That smile told me he knew somebody nearby had started moving fast. I waited until dark and went into the tree for the first time in almost 2 days. The air inside had turned close and sour. The drip by the bed had widened. One plastic panel on the right wall had come loose from the slat peg and sagged in toward the shelf. I lit the lamp on its lowest wick and packed with both hands, moving all the time. Rice, oil, fish, notebook, spare socks, line, hooks, the better knife, the small stove, the remaining medicine, and the old map scraps went into 2 bags. I left the sleeping bag, 1 blanket, a cup, and tools too heavy to carry at once. Then I lay flat and listened at the hidden exit. Nothing. I slid out under the fern curtain and froze halfway through when something clicked near the uphill side of the root ball. A pebble tin, one of my alarms. I pulled the bag clear, shut the fern back over the exit, and moved down slope on all fours until a stump hid me. Voices came through the rain after that. Low, 2 men, not close enough to make out the words, only the shape of them. One stayed uphill. One was moving through the deadfall toward the cavity entrance. I had enough gear out to survive a few nights. I also had half my food and all my bedding still inside. If they found the entrance now, I would lose the lot. I looked down slope toward the draw, saw only black brush and the wet glint of water, and made the choice I had been trying to avoid for days. I left the first bag where it sat, circled hard east, and came back toward the trunk from above with one flat stone in my hand. The man at the entrance had not opened the bark panel yet. He stood one step away from it, head bent, studying the seam. Bigger than the other 2 I had seen, broad in the back. No poncho. His partner stayed lower and out of sight, maybe covering the draw. I could not reach the first man without noise. I could pull him off the seam. I threw the stone low and hard into the brush 15 yards downhill from the vent branch. It hit a trunk and dropped. The man turned at once and took 2 steps toward the sound. I used that second to move the bark panel half an inch from where I had braced it. A small shift, enough to make it look less natural once he looked back. Then, I slid away uphill before he returned to it. If he studied the seam now, he might think some animal or wind had loosened it and spend more time on the wrong angle. It was not much. It bought me less than a minute. The minute was enough. The lower man hissed something from the drawer. The big man stepped off the seam and moved downhill to answer. I got back to my first bag, shouldered it, then limped north through brush so thick it tore at the new glove and yanked the stick from my hand twice. I did not stop until I reached the rock pocket. Then I went back out with the empty pack and did the same thing again. The second run hurt more. My knee had stiffened, and every downhill step sent a hot line through it. I made it to the tree, got the bedding and the second food bag out through the main entrance with no one in sight, and started back. Halfway to the pocket I heard one shout behind me, clipped short, followed by brush breaking fast in one direction. Then nothing. No gun. No second shout. Either they had split up or one had found another problem in the dark. I kept moving. Morning showed why the shout had cut off. Rain had gone colder in the night, and infected had drifted into the lower draw from somewhere beyond the road. I found one print line in soft earth where bare feet had cut through wet leaves only 30 yards from the route the 2 men had taken. Later, from the ridge, I saw movement below the tree. One infected was pacing in a narrow back and forth along the seep line. Another stood under the deadfall and lifted its head every time wind turned upslope. The 2 men were gone. They might have backed off when the infected closed in. They might have used the road and come back later. Either way, the tree had crossed a line. Too many people had been close to it in too short a span. Too much sign had built up around it. Secrecy was not gone yet. It was cracking. I stayed away for 3 full days after that, and lived out of the rock pocket and the north caches. The weather stayed sour. Rain in the morning, sleet on the higher ground afternoon, wet fog at dark. I repaired one boot with cut leather from June's trade and used the second work boot for parts. I stretched flour with ground acorns I had leached 2 weeks earlier. I reset the snap trap with one of the new springs and caught one rat the first night. Nothing after. On the third afternoon, I went back to the cove to keep the trade line open and to see whether June had spotted more movement near the roads. She met me near the skiff without surprise, as if she had expected me to come in thin and tired and carrying too little. "We saw Green Poncho north of the beach yesterday," she said before I asked anything. "He was watching our crab line from the trees." "Did he come closer?" "Not with Colin on the dune. Russ wanted to go after him. I said no." I handed over one packet of fish hooks and a small jar of rendered fat. "They were at my place." Her face did not change. "Found it?" "Found the edge, not the last seam. I moved most of what I could carry." "Then move the rest." "Nee says I won't do it fast." June looked past me toward the brush line, then back. "Stay here one night. Let it loosen. Leave before dawn if that sits better." I did not want to accept. One night in a group camp meant people hearing how I slept, how often I woke, how I packed gear, how much food I saved or wasted. It meant walls that were not mine, and a beach instead of timber between me and trouble. Then, I tried to step off the ramp and the knee grabbed hard enough to tilt me sideways. Russ caught my elbow without ceremony and set me straight again. "Take the bunk in the net shed," he said. "Nobody's asking for your map." I looked at June. She said, "You leave before dawn if you want. I'm offering dry boards and boiled water, not adoption." That line got closer to a laugh out of me than anything had in a while. "One night," I said. The net shed smelled of tar, old fish, wet rope, and smoke that had soaked into the walls over years before I ever saw the place. They gave me a bunk frame with one thin pad and a folded blanket. Better than the rock pocket. Worse than the tree in dry weather. I cleaned the knee with warm water, wrapped it tighter, and ate a bowl of fish stew with more broth than meat. Petra sat across from me on an overturned crate and repaired a torn float line, while Russ checked a beach gate made from scavenged fencing and culvert bolts. Colin stayed outside on watch long after dark. June worked at a table under lantern light, cutting chart paper into strips and writing inventory in a hand so neat it looked printed. Nobody pressed me for questions. That did more for trust than any kind speech could have. The only talk that night worth keeping came from Russ after the second bowl had gone around. He set a tin cup down and said, "We had a drifter through in summer, name of Ellis, boatman from farther south. He said Vic Talbot didn't raid camps head-on if he could help it. He watched, found who hunted alone, who traded alone, who carried tools worth lifting. Then he stripped the easy person first and used that to lean on the next one. Said Vic liked gear more than blood. That sounded almost decent until Ellis added Vic would leave a person alive if he thought fear would make a better trail than a body." June looked up from the chart strips. "That's enough." Russ shrugged. "She should know what kind of man is sniffing her lines." I said, "I already do." I left the cove before first light with one more flour packet, one cut of smoked fish, and a small strip of waxed canvas June said had come off an old sail. "For your leak," she said, "or for the next leak after that." I took the north route out and stopped twice to listen for a tail. Nothing. The woods had that dead-soaked quiet that makes a person think nothing is moving, even when things are. When I reached the ridge above my shelter zone, the bark flap alarm had been knocked flat and one end of the cord was gone. Not snapped, cut, clean enough to show even in bad light. I worked around to the lower drawer and saw where one boot had slid near the seep, then recovered. Left leg drag on the next 3 steps, the third man Russ had mentioned, the one who limped, so there had been at least 2 in the area after I moved gear out, maybe all 3. I did not go to the tree that day. I watched until afternoon from a hemlock pocket above the trunk. Near 3 o'clock, Vic came in again with green poncho, who I was now sure was Boone. The third man lagged behind on the roadside and showed only once when a shaft of weak light caught the bend in his stride. Vic went straight to the seep marker and checked the mud. Boone worked the lower deadfall with a stick and one gloved hand, careful, patient, silent. They had gotten closer to the pattern of the place. Not close enough to see the hidden exit. Close enough to know somebody had stopped using the easiest paths and started pulling stores out in pieces. They were reading absence as much as sign now. That was the worst part. A smart man with no trail only looks harder at the places where one should have been. I could not let them keep that ground forever. By dusk, they left the way they came, and I used the dark to get back inside the tree and patch the roof seam with the strip of canvas and roofing sealant from the state shed. The sealant had gone thick in the cold and took both thumbs to spread under the bark lip. I re-wedged the slat behind the vent box, packed the last of the rice and lamp oil, and pulled the notebook pages I had hidden inside the wall seam. Then, I sat on the platform in the damp with the lamp off and my fingers on the bark panel latch. If I abandoned the tree for good that night, I could carry maybe half the remaining useful weight and lose the rest to mold, men, or time. If I stayed and fought for it, I would be trying to save a secret already fraying at the edge. I woke from a brief doze to the pebble tin rattling uphill. One soft shake, then a second. A person, not wind. I slid off the platform and pressed my ear to the bark. Nothing. Then a boot scraped over the root mass above me and stopped. Boone or Vic had finally climbed the right angle in darkness. I eased toward the hidden exit with the food bag under one arm and froze when another sound came from outside the fern curtain. Wet, dragging steps. Slow, direct. Infected. One of the quiet ones had drifted close to the backside of the root ball. I had a man on the upper face and an infected near the exit. The space inside the tree felt too small to think in. The choice came down to timing. Men outside listened for owners. Infected outside moved on scent and noise. If I opened the bark panel and ran the front, I might hit a boot at arm's length. If I opened the hidden exit at the wrong second, I might land on an infected bent over the fern. I took the cup from the shelf, filled it with the last half-inch of stale rainwater, and poured it slowly along the lower bark seam inside the front entrance until it dripped out through the crack. Then I waited. The man above shifted his weight. A hand touched the bark panel once, then twice, following the wet line. He thought the seep had changed. He leaned in. I slipped out the hidden exit with my pack brushing the fern and put one knee into mud less than 4 feet from the infected. It was a woman in a torn blue coat, half turned toward the root wall, with one hand pressed to the dirt as if she had been listening through it. I could smell the wet cloth and the sour rot under it. She did not rush. Her head came around when the fern brushed my shoulder. I put my left hand on the back of her coat and shoved hard downhill before she fixed on me. She stumbled into the drawbrush and went after the movement of the ferns more than after me. That gave me a lane. I limped north, crouched under the deadfall, and heard the bark panel on the front of the tree scrape open behind me. Then, a sharp curse, one man only, cut short by a crash in the brush on the downhill side. The infected woman must have carried the line to him, or another one waited below. I did not go back to check. By dawn the storm had shifted, and the wind was driving in off the water hard enough to shake the top branches. I watched from the ridge and saw no movement at the tree until mid-morning. Then Boone came out from the lower drawer alone and looked around with his hood pushed back. He stood near the entrance long enough to tell me 2 things. 1, he knew the shelter was there now. 2, something during the night had gone bad enough that he did not want to linger. He spat into the brush, kicked at the bark panel, and walked off with one shoulder wet through and dark. No sign of Vic. No sign of the limping man. No sign of the infected woman. The tree had been opened. The secret was gone. I went to the cove the same day. I did not soften it. June met me at the top of the ramp and took one look at my face and pack and knew enough. They found it, she said. Yes. How much did you get out? Most food, bedding, notes, not tools, not all the repair stuff. You want help? I looked past her to the water, then back to the line of sheds. Saying yes meant giving my location to a group, even if I only led them part way. Saying no meant leaving the tree and whatever was left inside to 3 men who had already proven patient enough to come back in bad weather. I want 3 people, I said. Quiet feet, no torches unless I say. We go at dusk. June nodded once. Colin, Petra, Russ stays here. He's too heavy on deadfall. Russ, who had come out behind her, snorted and did not argue. We spent the day getting ready without wasting words. Petra packed rope, pry bar, and 1 empty frame pack. Colin took the binoculars, a short club cut from oak, and 2 lanterns wrapped in cloth so the glass would not clink. June carried her own pack and 1 old revolver I had never seen before, worn and taped at the grip. She caught me looking at it and said, I don't use it unless noise is already lost. That many rounds? 3. I don't plan around them. That answered more than the count. Out here, no one with sense planned around shots. They were for last gaps, not first moves. I led them inland by the ridgeline that kept off the roads and crossed rock where prints would not hold. Nobody complained about the pace even when my knee slowed the climbs. At the last turn before the stormfall zone, I stopped and pointed ahead through the timber. From here on, no talking unless you see movement or you lose the person in front of you. June nodded. Colin shifted left to widen the line. Petra rolled her shoulders once under the pack straps and followed me in. The wind had picked up enough to move the canopy in broad waves. Wet branches tapped and rubbed all around us. It covered small mistakes, not big ones. 1 snapped stick would still carry. The first alarm we found was the bark flap on the uphill side of the root ball. Someone had torn it free and tossed it aside. The pebble tin cord lay cut and wrapped around a fern stalk. My stomach tightened at that more than it had at the empty shelter. Men who cut alarms and leave the cord hung where the owner will see it are sending a message. June saw it too. Her jaw set hard for a second. Then she eased it and looked at me. You weren't exaggerating. I don't do that. No, you don't. We moved lower. The tree sat in the deadfall with its entrance hanging half open where Boone had kicked it. Rain had washed mud in across the threshold. One blanket corner showed from inside, soaked dark. Colin took first watch from a stump above the trunk. Petra and I crawled to the entrance while June covered the lower drawer. The space inside looked worse than I expected. One shelf had fallen. The cup was on the floor under the drip. My old sleeping pad lay folded over itself in the mud where somebody had stepped on it. The tool roll under the platform was gone. So was the hatchet sheath I had left hanging by the vent slat. They had not taken everything. They had taken what a gear-minded man would take first, and left what could not be carried in one pass. Petra handed me the empty frame and kept one shoulder braced against the bark while I loaded roofing sealant, the stove shield, the spare tarp, 2 cups, the better of the 2 blankets, and the hand drill set I had almost forgotten behind the shelf. A sharp bird burst came from Colin uphill. One call only, human sign. I froze with the hand drill half in the pack. June moved in at once and touched my shoulder. Out! We backed clear of the entrance and slid behind the root mass. Colin came down low and fast. One man on the north ridge, maybe 2 farther back. I only saw the first one clear. Green poncho. Boone. I looked at June. She looked at the dark coming into the trees, and then at the half-packed frame. Take what you can carry now, she said. Nothing loose. We leave clean. Petra packed the last blanket and the stove shield. I took the hand drill, one small sack of oats I had missed earlier, and the knife sharpener from the shelf. Then we moved uphill under the worst tangle of wind-thrown spruce, using the trunks as cover. Boone was better than Russ at deadfall, and worse than Colin. That helped us for about 10 minutes. We could hear him once, then not again, then once more off to the side, where he had tried to cut the angle. No voice from Vic, no sign of the limping man. That worried me more than Boone. A noisy follower is often bait for the quiet one. June stopped us under a split cedar and pointed downslope. 2 infected were standing under the branches in the draw below, both fixed on the general line of our movement but not yet on us. The wind was turning. If it crossed right, they would come straight up the gap we needed to use. I leaned to June and said, "There's a road cut west of here with a culvert throat. Sound carries through it. If one of them makes noise down there, the sleepers drift that way." June understood at once. She looked at Colin. "Can you make the west line and come back on rock?" He said, "Yes. Do it. No light." He was gone in 3 steps, more shape than sound. We waited under the cedar with the infected below and the storm building in the tops. Boone moved again somewhere behind us. Petra shifted her pack strap tighter and kept one hand on the pry bar at her hip. Nobody said what we were all thinking. If Colin got pinned or fell, we would have to break downhill through infected and windfall with 3 loaded packs and 1 bad knee. The sound came 5 minutes later, far west and lower than our line. Metal on concrete, then a rolling clatter through the culvert throat. Good, clean, ugly noise. The infected below us turned at once and went toward it in the direct way they always did once a line opened for them. A second sound followed. Maybe a stone or scrap metal Colin had carried for the job. Boone cursed somewhere uphill and moved faster through the deadfall, trying to make sense of whether the noise meant us or the road. June jerked her head north. We took the gap and climbed. We made the ridge. Colin met us there with mud up both sleeves and one cheek scraped raw by bark. "Culvert worked," he said. "More than 2 down there now." June checked his face once. "Can you walk?" "I'm here." That was enough. We kept moving north through ground only I knew well, using old elk runs and one narrow shelf above a wash where the slope dropped so hard nobody unfamiliar with it would try it in dark weather. My knee almost cost us there. Halfway across the shelf it buckled and sent me into the bank with my shoulder and pack. Petra caught the frame before it slid. I got my boot under me again, pushed off the dirt, and crossed the rest on hands and feet. No one commented. That helped more than sympathy would have. We reached the rock pocket after full dark and stopped only long enough to sort loads. June looked inside the hide, saw the rolled tarp, the old nut jar, and the narrow sleeping space, then looked back at me without any expression I could read. "You've been thin for a reason," she said. "It works until it doesn't. Tonight it doesn't." She was right. The rock pocket had one entry and no clean exit if 3 men found it. We moved on. I led them to the north caches instead, dug up the food bag under the rotten stump, and handed out the weight. That was when the rain came back hard. Not a steady forest rain this time. A straight coastal storm, wind-driven and mean, cold enough to sting the face. Within minutes, every branch was throwing water. Every slope turned slick. Every scent line out there got ugly and mixed. Good for losing men, bad for keeping footing. The storm split us before midnight. Not far, not for long, long enough. We were crossing the old wash north of the ridge when a rotten log gave under Petra's back foot and dumped her sideways into the runoff. The pry bar clanged against stone. One short, hard sound, then a curse she swallowed fast. June and I got her up at once. Colin took the loose frame before it washed. The problem was not Petra's ankle, though she rolled it and came up limping. The problem was the clang. Noise carries oddly in storm wind. It disappears in one direction and jumps clean in another. We heard the answer maybe 30 seconds later. Not a human call. A dry, ugly rustle from brush ahead and below, then another farther east. Infected holding under cover had heard enough. We changed line and climbed, but climbing with one bad knee and Petra's ankle turned the pace ugly. June went last and watched the wash behind us. Colin kept a branch stick in his hand and used it to sweep low brush before stepping into it. Twice he pushed a hidden shape aside and found only snagged fabric or a fallen branch. The third time the shape moved back. He struck once with the stick, low and hard, not to stand and fight, only to open a lane. We pushed through a tangle of cedar limbs and got onto higher ground, where rock showed through and scent had room to break in the wind. That bought us a little space. Not much. At first light we were less than a mile from the cove and in no shape to take another inland turn. June said so flat. "We go beachside, fast as we can. If Vic found your tree and tracked north, he won't expect us dropping straight to water in this." I agreed, though I did not like having my whole remaining life broken into 4 loads on other people's backs. We cut down a drainage line choked with salmonberry canes and came out above the beach where black stones met blown foam and drift logs. Russ was there already, waiting under a tarp lean-to near the cove's north edge, with 1 more pack frame and 2 mugs of boiled water. I stared at him harder than I meant to. He shrugged. "June said if you didn't come back by dawn, I should come looking from the easy side." "Easy side?" Petra said, limping past him. "You call this easy?" Russ looked at the storm. "Easier than where you went." The cove took us in fast. No drama, no speeches. Wet gear under cover, food sorted, blankets hung from lines. Petra's ankle wrapped, my knee checked and rewrapped with one of June's last clean bandages. The hand drill and stove went on a high shelf in the fuel shed. The food bags were counted in front of me, not behind my back. I noticed that. The notebook stayed with me. So did the knife and the remaining lamp oil. June gave me a place in the net shed again and said, 2 nights, then we decide what this becomes. I asked, "What decides it?" "Whether Vic follows the tree to the cove, whether you can work with our rules, whether I think feeding 1 more person costs more than the ground you read for us." Fair answer. Better than fake kindness. The storm held us there 2 full days. During that time, the cove stopped feeling like a trade point and started feeling like a machine with too few parts. Russ and Petra repaired the beach gate with the culvert bolts from the state shed. Colin checked the tree line every 2 hours and slept in a chair by the fuel door when he had to. June measured flour, fish, fuel, and lamp wick with a pencil and a strip of chart paper. One older man I had only seen once before came out of the back hut to mend net floats and cough into a rag. His name was Lester. He did not talk unless spoken to, and looked at everything as if he expected it to break. I fit where I could. I cut the salvaged boot leather into patch shapes, repaired one of Petra's gloves, showed Russ how to brace a weak tarp line against the side gusts, and spent long minutes studying the slope above the cove whenever the rain eased enough to make shapes out there. On the second evening, Colin came in with news that turned the room quiet. One man up on the north ridge for about 10 seconds, he said. Tall, dark jacket, no poncho. I lost him when the squall came through. June set her pencil down. Too high to see camp detail? Too high for detail. Close enough to mark where smoke rises. Russ muttered into his cup. So now he knows. I looked at June and said, he may have known before. If Boone saw me trading twice, the cove was already on their list. June did not soften it. Maybe. Either way, the line between your ground and mine is gone now. That night she came to the net shed while I was patching the second boot sole and sat on the opposite bunk without asking. I don't need your exact shelter point, she said. I do need the roads, gullies and old structures north of here where a man like Vic would hole up after a storm. I thought it through before answering. Old way station near the washed bridge, if the roof hasn't gone. 2 cabins above the cut road, both poor cover. One with a half-collapsed porch. Service shed east of the burn line, which you already hit. A bait shack north of the point with no back wall. If he wants dry and hidden, best bet is the way station or a boat pulled above the road line. June nodded. You'll walk that with Colin tomorrow if the rain breaks. Then what? Then we find whether he's watching or nesting. I set the awl down and looked at the boot in my lap. You hunt him, he may come to ground hard, she said. I'm not hunting. I'm making sure he doesn't get to choose the next thin person. Rain broke just enough at first light for Colin and me to move. We went north with empty packs, 1 lantern wrapped in canvas, and food for a single day. June stayed to hold the cove. Russ wanted to come. She told him no. You sound like furniture in wet brush, she said. Russ took it without heat, which told me he had heard it before. Colin and I moved well together from the first bend of the trail. He did not ask for stories. He did not step where I had not checked unless the ground made the choice obvious. At the washed bridge, we found prints under the lee side of the bank, where storm water had not hit full force. 3 sets. 1 boot with a left drag on the toe. Recent enough that the edges still held. The way station sat 200 yards farther north with 1 side wall standing, and the roof mostly intact. Colin circled east. I took the west side through salmonberry and alder. The place smelled of wet wood, mouse droppings, and one other thing when I got close. Kerosene. Faint but there. Not old spill smell. Used lantern smell. I crouched by the broken back wall and waited. No voices. No movement. Colin showed one hand through a gap in the siding and pointed down. Trapline. A loop of fish line at ankle height running into a stack of tin lids and broken glass. Cheap alarm. Fast to make. Vic or one of his men had been there recently enough to think he might come back. Inside, we found no people and no real camp. 1 bed of fir boughs damp at the edges. A cold stove made from a cut fuel can. 2 sardine tins. 1 strip of map with the road and cove shape marked in pencil. No names. A pair of gloves too large for me and worn through the thumb. Colin looked at the map scrap and said, "They've got us measured." I nodded toward the sardine tins. 3 men. You sure? 1 man alone can eat from 1 tin over a whole watch if he has to. 2 men maybe share 1. 3 men leave 3 if they think they can carry more fresh. He tucked that away without comment and checked the back corner again. No guns. No extra blankets. No stash of food. It was a lookout nest, not a home. We did not tear it apart. That would only tell Vic someone had found it. Colin clipped the fish line and reset it after he stepped over. I put the map scrap back where it sat under the tin. Then we backed out and took the road line south for 50 yards before cutting uphill into timber. If Vic returned to the way station and saw nothing moved, he might think his position was still blind. That mattered. At the north point above the cove, Colin climbed a snag to glass the shoreline while I checked the bait shack. The shack held rotten boards, gull droppings, and no man. When Colin came down, his face had gone harder than usual. "1 skiff is gone from the cove," he said. I stood up too fast and the knee complained. "Taken?" "Maybe drifted. More likely taken. It was tied." We turned back at once. The missing skiff changed June's math before we even reached the beach. Russ had found the cut line. Clean blade work, not storm damage. 1 fuel can gone with it. Not much fuel. Enough for a short run around the point to hit another beach or cross a gap faster than walking. June listened to our report, then looked at the tree line and said, He's testing whether we chase one thing at a time. Russ said, "We should move camp." To where? He had no answer. No one did. Every fixed site on that coast had a cost. The cove at least had sightlines, gear, and salt water at the back. Move inland, and the sleepers got closer. Move farther south, and we lost the nets and crab line. Move north, and we walked toward the men already watching us. That afternoon, I made a choice I had been avoiding since the day on the ramp. I took June up the ridge and showed her the outer ring of my shelter zone. Not the exact trunk at first. The old stormfall, the seep line, the false trail that ended in the decoy tin, the ridge pocket where I watched from above. She walked it slow and kept her eyes on the ground longer than on the trees. When she saw the tree itself at last, partly hidden under the mass of deadfall and rain-dark bark, she stopped and let out one breath through her nose. "You got 3 winters in there? 3 years with breaks." She looked at the half-open entrance and the stripped gear marks around it. "No more." "I know." "Then we don't defend it. We strip the rest when weather gives us a lane, then we let it go." Hearing her say it put a hard final edge on the thought I had kept half pushed away. The tree had been a shelter. The secret had been the wall around it. The wall was gone. We planned the last recovery for the next night when rain was supposed to come back hard, and wind would keep the canopy moving. June wanted 4 people. I said 3 moved quieter. We settled on 3, and Russ waiting near the ridge with the extra frame. Colin would hold the north watch. Petra would go with me into the trunk if the entrance held. June would cover the lower drawer and the hidden exit once I showed it to her. That was the last lock I had left to open. I did not do it lightly. I showed her the fern curtain and the way the root channels shored the crawl space. She took one look inside and said, "A bad collapse in there and you'd have died alone 6 feet from air." "Yes." "You knew that?" "Yes." She nodded once. "Good. I only work with people who know their own bad odds." The weather hit on time. We moved after dark with no lights and only one wrapped lantern for emergency use. Russ waited where the ridge dropped into the stormfall zone with the frame pack and one stick marker in case we had to find him in the blow. Colin went north and took his perch. Petra and I crawled to the entrance while June slid toward the drawer. The trunk had settled more since our last visit. One side of the cavity roof had sagged, and water was pooling where the platform used to keep it off the floor. We loaded fast. 2 tool tins, the remaining blanket, one sealed jar of oats I had missed behind the slat wall, the cup, 1 coil of cord, the small roll of repair tape, and a packet of old photos I had not looked at in over a year, and had forgotten until my hand brushed them under the shelf. I took those without thinking. Petra passed me the second tin when Colin's warning came from uphill. One bird burst. Pause. Then another. Closer this time. Human movement. And more than one. June hissed from the drawer side. "Out now." We backed out together. I had 1 tin in my left hand, and the photo packet tucked inside my jacket. Petra had the blanket and tape. The wind hit the deadfall hard enough to make half the branches above us knock together. For a second I thought that would hide our retreat. Then a beam of light flashed once through the trees uphill, gone as fast as it came. Lantern, hooded and opened by mistake or design. Vic's group had decided noise and light were worth the risk. June shoved the hidden exit fern aside with her boot. "Down." I hesitated. "Petra first. The roof's soft." Petra did not waste time arguing. She dropped to a knee, slid into the root gap, and pulled the blanket through after her. I passed the tin, then went in behind with June last. The crawl space smelled of wet dirt and old roots. We came out behind the root ball and immediately heard one of the men at the front entrance. "It's open," he said. No attempt to stay quiet now. Another voice answered from uphill. That one I did not know. Not Boone. Too rough and breathy. Maybe the limping man. No sign of Vic's voice. That did not help. A quiet leader is usually the one seeing the whole shape while others rush. We crawled 3 body lengths through fern and dead branches before standing. June pointed north. Then, a shot cracked from the uphill side of the tree, loud enough to flatten everything else for 1 bad second. The sound rolled through the timber, hit the drawers, and came back thin and ugly from every direction. I froze in place from habit more than thought. June grabbed the back of my jacket and yanked me into motion. Move, now! No one needed more than that. The one round changed the woods. All the quiet infected spread through those wet drawers, and brush pockets would be working off that line within seconds. We did not get far before the first response came. Not close, not yet. A rattling in brush downhill, then another farther left. Petra stumbled on her bad ankle and caught herself with one hand on a trunk. I took the blanket from her, shoved the tin under my arm tighter, and kept moving. The ground turned ugly under the stormfall, all hidden holes and slick bark. Branches slashed at our faces and packs. Behind us, someone shouted once, not a word I could make out. Only anger and surprise mixed together. Then brush crashed and stopped all at once. A second later, another shot went off lower and farther east. Worse than the first. It meant the men were now shooting at movement or fear, not at anything they had lined up clean. The woods would answer with more than one infected this time. Russ found us by the stick marker only 20 yards from where he was supposed to wait. He took one look at our faces, at the blanket, at the tin, and handed his frame to Petra without asking questions. "North Ridge or beach?" he said. June answered, "North Ridge first, too many draws below." Russ nodded and fell in on the rear, where his heavier footfall would matter least with shots already loose behind us. We climbed. Halfway up the first rise, Colin came in from the side at a fast crouch and said, "3 men, one may be down." I saw Green Poncho break west, then 2 sleepers came across the lower line. "Vic?" June asked. Colin shook his head. Didn't see him clear. We kept moving. At the top of the ridge, I looked back once through the trees. I wish I had not, though wish had no use there. The tree sat dark under the moving branches with its entrance hanging open and one lantern beam jumping wild near the front, then vanishing. A shape stumbled from the lower side of the root ball and went down in the brush. Whether it was Boone, Vic, the limping man, or one of the infected, I could not tell. Then the root mass shifted. Not much. A slow, heavy slump on the downhill edge, where water had eaten at the soil and the crawl space had taken more from it than I ever should have cut. Mud and roots sagged, one section of bark peeled, and part of the hidden exit vanished under a slide of dirt and fern. The tree did not explode or fall apart. It simply gave way where it had been weakening for years. That was enough. No going back after that. We reached the cove after dawn, soaked through and carrying the last worth-saving pieces of my old life. June barred the beach gate behind us and set Colin on the north watch without waiting for rest. Russ hung the blanket and tarp by the stove. Petra sat on a crate and unwrapped her ankle with hands that had started shaking from strain, not fear, and asked for the tape before she asked for food. I set the tool tin on the table in the smoke hut, unwrapped the photo packet, saw the edges had stayed dry, and slid it back into my jacket. Nobody crowded around the gear. Nobody cheered the escape. June only looked at me and said, "That sight is done." "Yes," I said. "Then we settle what comes after." We did that the same morning, while rain hammered the roof hard enough to make ordinary voices useless unless a person leaned in. June laid out her terms one by one, not soft, not unfair. I would stay in the net shed and eat from the cove stores only if I worked a full share when my knee allowed it. I would guide inland when needed, but no one would press me for every old hide or cache unless the cove was moving camp under direct threat. Any food or tools I had brought in remained mine until I chose to trade them or add them to group count. If I wanted to leave later, I could leave with what I had carried in and what I had earned. No one would follow unless I stole from the cove or led danger straight to it. "That's the clean version," she said. "You can say no." I looked at the wet chart paper, the measured piles of fish, the patched beach gate, the lantern wick drying by the stove, and the 4 people in that hut who had walked into my ruined shelter zone and back out again when the whole thing could have gone bad for them in 10 different ways. "I'm staying," I said. June nodded once. "Then eat first, then sleep. After that, Russ needs help with the north line, and Petra wants those gloves finished." I slept for 6 hours in the net shed without dreaming, and woke to gulls and the smell of broth. The knee had stiffened hard but held my weight. Outside, the cove looked the same as it had from the ridge on that first grey morning. Blue tarp roof, nets on one wall, smoke rising in one straight line when wind allowed it. Nothing about it from a distance said home. That word did not fit yet. Maybe it never would. It was a place with rules, work, and enough dry wood to keep a lamp lit if the ration held. It was also the only place left where somebody knew what my face looked like when I came in cold, and did not use that as a lever. Russ had already hauled the culvert bolts to the beach gate, and was cursing under his breath at a hinge pin that kept slipping. I took the finished glove patches to Petra first. She was outside the fuel shed with her ankle up on a bucket, sorting crabline and cutting rot from one section with a pocket knife. She took the gloves, turned them over in both hands, and said, "Good work, better than mine. You open doors better. I open them loud. You open things quiet." She looked toward the tree line above the cove. "You think he's dead?" "Which one?" "The tall one." I thought about the lantern beam jerking near the tree, the crash in the brush, and the slope giving way under the root mass. "I think one of them got hurt. Past that, I don't know." Petra nodded once. "Good answer." By afternoon, I was helping Russ brace the gate with the culvert bolts from the inland shed. We drove them through old plank and drift log braces, not to make the cove strong against a siege, only to keep the beach line from failing under panic weight if infected or men pushed in together. Russ worked hard and complained the whole time in a way that never slowed his hands. He told me where he had found the crab pots after the owner of this place never came back from a supply run in the first month. He told me the first winter took 3 people from the cove and nearly took the rest through moldy stores and one broken ankle that turned bad. He told me June had kept inventory on chart paper even when there was nothing left to count except fish hooks and clean rags. None of that came out as speeches. It came out in pieces between hammer strikes and line checks. By the time the gate stood square, I knew more about the cove than June had ever said outright. Near dusk, Colin came down from the North Watch with one new report and no drama around it. No movement on the ridge. One distant call from the road cut afternoon. Could have been a man. Could have been wind in metal. I didn't chase it. June said, "Good." That was all. No one at the cove acted as if one quiet day meant safety had returned. Nets still had to be checked. Water still had to be caught. Fish still had to be salted. The old man Lester still coughed into the rag and mended floats under the overhang. The machine kept moving. I fit into it where there was room. That night I took my notebook out in the net shed and made a new set of marks. Not for my old shelter. That page I tore out and fed into the stove a strip at a time. The new page held the cove stores I had brought in, the North Ridge lines I knew well enough to guide without thinking, and 2 possible cache points inland that sat far enough from camp and from my dead tree to work as shared backup if June agreed. One under a split boulder above the wash. One inside a rotted stump field where scent broke hard in wind and brush-covered approach from 3 sides. I stared at those marks a long time before I closed the notebook. Sharing routes had once looked like the first step toward losing them. After the last week, keeping everything to myself had done the same job from the other direction. In the morning, I showed June the 2 backup points and told her the ground around each, the water sources nearby, the bad approaches, the problem branches that would dump sign if brushed in dry weather, and the places where infected tended to settle when cold rain held for days. She listened, asked only the questions tied to movement and storage, then said, "We'll look at them after the next weather break. Shared caches, not personal holes. If one gets hit, the other stays blind." "Agreed," I said. She folded the chart strip she had been using and tucked it into her pocket. "Then you're not a trader anymore." I knew what she meant. "No, you're cove now, as long as you hold your end." That was as close as she came to welcome. It was enough. I walked to the beach after that, and stood by the repaired gate with the surf rolling in black and cold over the stones. The tree was inland beyond 2 ridges and a draw, half collapsed, opened and done. My hands still remembered every peg and seam in it. My back still expected the curve of the platform when I sat down in the dark. None of that changed the ground. The shelter had carried me 3 years by keeping me out of sight and out of reach. It had also taught me how narrow one person's margin gets when every tool, every meal, and every hour of watch sits on one back and one pair of boots. The cove did not fix the world. It did not make people safe. It only spread the load across more hands and more eyes, which was the first honest improvement I had seen in a long time. By noon, Russ had me on the north line, hanging repaired cord from the drift posts. Petra was teaching me which crab buoys had a habit of twisting under crosswind. Colin was already planning a quiet walk to the split boulder cache after the next fog, and June had added my flour and tool count to the chart paper under the heading for inland stores. The work kept coming. That was good. Work left less room for useless thought. Far up the tree line, the timber stood dark and wet and gave nothing back. Vic Talbot might be dead under that stormfall. He might have crawled out with Boone and the limping man and gone farther north to wait for another thin camp to show itself. I had no clean answer for that. Neither did June. So we built the gate stronger, dried the blanket, patched the gloves, and marked the next 2 cache points on a fresh strip of chart paper that would never leave the cove. When night came again, I did not go inland. I checked the lamp wick in the net shed, laid my repaired boots where they could dry by the wall, and set the notebook under the bunk frame instead of inside a bark seam. Outside, the surf hit the stones, the smoke point hissed in the damp, and Colin's boots crossed the boards once on his way to the watch post. I knew every weak point in the cove after less than a week. I knew where the gate would fail first if too much weight hit it, where the smoke drifted in a south wind, where the roof over the fuel shed sagged, and which floorboard in the net shed clicked unless a person stepped along the nail line. Knowing those things did not make me want to run. It made me start planning how to fix them. That was the first time since the tree opened that my hands had moved toward the future instead of away from the past. And that's where we'll stop for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me how the story hit you, what moments worked, what didn't, and what you'd want to hear next. And a big thank you to everyone supporting the channel. You keep this project alive. Until next time, Survivor. Jack's Nightmares, signing off.